You make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Shopify. Shopify is a platform designed for anyone to sell anywhere, giving entrepreneurs like myself the resources once reserved for just big business. Sign up for a $1 per month trial at shopify.com/gold, all lowercase.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Okay, I want to start off this evening's podcast by talking a little bit about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And, you know, when Trump first proposed DOGE, I really kind of dismissed it because when it was originally proposed, it was going to be completely separate from the U.S. government. It was going to be more like a private think tank. And it reminded me a lot of the Grace Commission, which was something that Ronald Reagan put together in his first term. And, you know, a lot of the Trump campaign was, I think, based on a lot of the Reagan campaign, because Ronald Reagan, when he ran, he was going to eliminate government agencies and departments like the Department of Energy and the Department of Education. But he was also going to Washington to drain the swamp and to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. And so Donald Trump ran on a similar platform on those issues. And so I thought that DOGE would be more like the Grace Commission, which did identify a lot of cuts to government spending, and it made the recommendations to Congress, and they fell on deaf ears, and nothing got cut. And so there was no real cuts to government spending under Reagan. Now, of course, the problem wasn't nearly as acute as it is now. When Reagan came to office in 1980, you know, we still only had, 30% to 40% debt to GDP. So the problem was there. It was growing, but it was in its infancy compared to where it is right now. In fact, the national debt didn't even hit $1 trillion until sometime, during Reagan's first term. It got to $1 trillion. I mean, now it's almost 37 trillion. So it's a far bigger problem that needs a much, more draconian solution. Yet we never even got a solution when Reagan was president, and because politically it was a non-starter. Nobody really wanted to cut anything. And so I was not very optimistic about DOGE. But my opinion has evolved somewhat on DOGE and what they will be able to accomplish based on the fact that Trump has actually made it an official part of the government. I mean, it's operating right out of the White House. And the representatives of DOGE actually have authority granted to them by the president to go through various agencies and departments and try to eliminate what they can without congressional approval, spending that is determined to be wasteful, fraudulent, abusive, and they're actually making quite a bit of progress. Now, while I think that they are going to be able to make some cuts, far more than anything that we saw with the Grace Commission, I don't think it's going to be nearly enough to get us out of jail as far as paying for the tax cuts. I think that even if they can come up with $1 billion, or not $1 billion, $1 trillion worth of cuts, which I don't even see how they can get anywhere close to that. Right now, I'm looking at the at national debt clock, and they have a DOGE window up there, a DOGE clock. So according to usdebtclock.org, the DOGE boys have found ways to eliminate $114 billion worth of spending, which in a $7.2 trillion budget, which is what we got, is about 1.5%, assuming these cuts are actually all eliminated. I mean, maybe these are just expenditures that have been identified that they're hoping to get rid of. I'm not really sure. But, they're going to find, if you actually have smart people who are dedicated and committed and not beholden, right, to some bureaucratic establishment. You get people like Elon Musk and his team in there, they are going to find waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, anybody who believes that that's not there is completely naive and doesn't understand government. You can't have a government program that isn't wasteful, that isn't abused, and that isn't the subject of fraud. I mean, that is par for the course. It is impossible to have programs that do not have that. That's why you want to minimize the amount of government you have, because anything the government decides to do is going to be subject to waste, fraud, and abuse. That's why it's a very inefficient process. That's why you want to completely limit what the government does, because so much is going to be wasted. So much is going to be stolen, right? There's going to be so much graft and kickbacks. I mean, that is the nature of government. There's nothing you could do about it, right? So all you could do is minimize it. And yeah, they're going to be able to find some of the waste, fraud, and abuse. They're not going to be able to get all of it unless you're going to, cut it out from the root, unless you're going to eliminate the entire agency or the program. You're going to get some of the waste, fraud, and abuse, but you're not going to get all of it. Some of the stuff that looks so ridiculous. And if they're pulling off scams this easy, you can only imagine the stuff that's harder to ferret out. But, now they're talking about looking at the Social Security Administration, and they're seeing that checks are being mailed out to people who have been dead for decades, in many cases, multiple decades. I mean, and some of the ages are obviously, completely farcical, because you're talking 200-300 years. They didn't even have Social Security until 1933. And so nobody that was born before the Civil War, probably even lived old enough to collect it. I mean, maybe if someone was born in 1850, they got it, in the mid 30s, but certainly they got people in there that were born during the Revolutionary War. So obviously that's just complete fraud. I mean, I don't even know where they're getting these birth dates, but I'm sure what is going on in Social Security, and it has been going on, obviously, for quite some time, is that people die of natural causes or whatever. They die. They were collecting Social Security. A lot of people now just have direct deposit. It's pretty easy. The Social Security money goes directly into your bank account. So you don't even have a check that you got to take down to a bank. It just goes right in your bank account. Let's say, my father's getting Social Security and he passes away. And, his bank account is still open. Maybe I don't tell the bank that my dad's dead. How does the bank know? And if the Social Security Administration, I'm not really sure what the procedure is. Who's supposed to tell the Social Security Administration that somebody who's collecting Social Security died? Or even if they hadn't collected it, right? Once they get to the age of eligibility, maybe the checks just start coming automatically. I don't know. But assuming, my father is getting Social Security, direct deposit, and he dies, I got his ATM card. I know his PIN. And I see that the Social Security checks keep coming, and I just spend the money, right? I don't tell anybody. And I'm sure that this is going on rampant throughout the country, that people are just collecting Social Security for their dead parents, or maybe even their grandparents. Who knows? Maybe somebody dies and his son collects Social Security, and then that guy dies, and the grandson collects the Social Security for both of them, right? And nobody tells anybody, and nobody probably feels bad about it. I mean, people don't necessarily see the victim in this crime. It's not like, if you rob somebody, you know that you've taken money from another person, right? You may feel bad about that. You may feel a little guilty. I mean, a lot of people won't steal from somebody else because they can recognize that that's wrong. But money from the government, a lot of people don't even look at that as wrong, because they look at the government as this unlimited, just pot of money that just has money out of thin air. So who's the loser? It's a victimless crime as far as most people are concerned. I mean, the government is spending $7 trillion a year. What's an extra 10 grand or whatever it is for one guy's Social Security? He probably doesn't even care. I mean, the deficit is $2 trillion a year, $3 trillion a year. What's an extra 10 or 20 grand? I mean, who cares, right? In fact, a lot of people may rationalize it like, well, I'm helping the economy. I take that Social Security money and I go out and spend it. It's my own stimulus. It's my own QE, right? I'm taking the money and I'm spending it, and everybody is winning. And so why should I, upset this apple cart by telling the Social Security Administration that the person who's entitled to this money is dead? And, we've created a country of people who think they're entitled to free stuff. I mean, nobody who's on welfare has any qualms about cashing those checks. And so, once people are of the mindset that the government owes them something, that they are entitled to something, well, then they're entitled to that too. What is the difference, right? I mean, so what? They made a mistake, and especially if a lot of other people are benefiting from the same mistake, you might feel like a fool if you're the one that says you don't want the money. Because if one person calls up the Social Security Administration and says, hey, my dad died, stop sending the checks. But if he knows that a lot of other people whose dads have also died, they're getting their checks. I mean, they're not, what they're doing is not going to make a big difference in the scheme of things. So they might as well cash their check, especially when people are struggling to get by. Imagine how much more difficult it would be if all these people who are collecting Social Security checks for dead people, if they didn't have that money, right? How would they survive? I just read again that the Social Security delinquencies now are at a 13 or 14-year high. But the last time Social Security credit card delinquencies, but the last time they were this high, we were in a Great Recession. And so normally, in order to get to a point where people can't make their credit card payments, you're in a recession. Now, I think we are in a recession, and that's why people can't make their payments. But if we're not in a recession now, just imagine how much worse it's going to be. I already talked about on the podcast that you have a record number of people who are making their minimum payment on their credit card. I mean, who the hell would do that unless you had to, especially when credit card interest rates are 24%. You've got record high interest rates. You would want to pay that balance down as quickly as possible. The fact that a record number of people are making the minimum payment shows you how bad they are. I was listening to Walmart. I guess they report earnings tomorrow, and they were talking about it. And I think Walmart had recently mentioned that the biggest growth in their customer base is coming from households that make over $100,000 a year. Now, if higher income households are now shopping at Walmart, what does that tell you, right? I mean, they're trading down to Walmart. They don't really want to go to Walmart. It's just that they can't afford more expensive stores. And so they now got no choice. They got to go shopping at Walmart. That is a sign of distress. The fact that Walmart is earning more money because wealthier people are now shopping there. Now, can you imagine their normal customers who were not wealthy, who were shopping at Walmart? Now, what are they doing? Right now, when they shop at Walmart, it's mostly food that they buy, because by the time they finish filling up the grocery cart, they got no money left over for anything else. And then they're using credit. So a lot of people are probably only getting by because they got a dead person's Social Security check. But hopefully they can find a way, to solve a very simple problem and, get some verification. I guess I would say anybody who's even over the age of 90. I mean, not that many people, even make it to 90, let alone 100, 110, 120. But certainly, like I said, look, at 90, we're going to send something out, and we need some proof that the guy's still alive. You got to go into, we don't mind sending your Social Security, but you got to prove that you're still living, right? I mean, how hard could that be to prove that you're alive? So they may be able to make some cuts in Social Security after all. But the problem is there's a lot of people who are legitimately going to be going on Social Security every year. And, so the net may still be that Social Security spending increases, especially if we get the budget that Trump is supporting, in the House. I think the Senate is having more trouble, but I think it's making progress in the House, where you have no tax on Social Security benefits. That is a massive increase in Social Security benefits. Part of this new bill that Trump is, promoting and hoping to, help push across the finish line includes an increase of $4 trillion or $5 trillion in the debt ceiling, which will only get the government through another year or two. So it's not like that's even that big an increase. But Donald Trump wants an increase in the debt ceiling. And that is very unfortunate, because if Trump is 100% committed to making big cuts in government spending, and he doesn't have to worry about court challenges, because right now you got all these lawsuits that Congress or people are filing to try to say Trump doesn't have the authority to cut this, right? You can't. Congress has appropriated this money and you got to spend it, right? You can't decide you're not going to spend it. The power of the purse rests with the Congress, and you got to spend what we appropriate. And you can't unilaterally get rid of programs that we've passed. We need to do that, right? And they may have a point, and a lot of these cuts may end up not even holding because some court throws them out. But what Trump could do, and no court could stop him, is just refuse to sign that increase in the debt ceiling. Just say right now, look, the buck stops with me, right? We're not raising the debt ceiling. I think I mentioned this on the last podcast. And then, there's no court. Congress has got to cut spending dramatically right now. But, that would accelerate a lot of painful reductions in government spending. Necessary pain, constructive pain, pain that would be worth enduring for the big benefits that would accrue, and not in the very distant future, but in the relatively near future. But that's not going to happen. Anyway, I got a quick commercial break, so stick around. Coming right back. When you think about businesses growing their sales beyond forecasts like Feastables by Mr. Beast, or even a legacy business like Mattel, sure, you think about a product with demand, a focused brand, and influence-driven marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the business behind the business that makes selling and, for the shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less abandoned carts and way more sales going. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. What I love about Shopify is no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and to take your business to the next level. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Mattel uses. Sign up for your 1-month trial period at shopify.com/gold. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/gold to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/gold. All right, so I want to talk, though, about the whole idea that government programs are always going to be abused. There's always going to be fraud. And, of course, there's always going to be waste. I mean, first of all, waste is going to go hand in hand with government at all times, because there is no incentive for any government to be efficient. See, in the private sector, if you own a business, you have every incentive to be efficient, because whatever money you save means you have a bigger profit. So you earn more money if you're efficient. So yeah, I'm going to save money wherever I can. Plus, if I'm in competition and I'm not being efficient, and my competition is, they can undercut me. They can offer a lower price, and I'm going to lose customers. So you have all sorts of market forces and self-interest that drive efficiencies. Even in charities, right? If I'm running a charity, I'm going to be efficient because charities will, come out with reports and they'll show how much they spend on their overhead and how much actually goes to the intended recipients of the charity. And if you don't show that you're doing a good job and that you're running a tight ship and that most of the donations go to the people that you're trying to help, people aren't going to donate to your charity. They're going to donate to another charity, right? They're going to donate to a charity that is efficient with their charitable donations, right? They don't want their donations just to go to a bloated bureaucracy. They want them to help whatever cause the charity has, decided it's going to help. And so charities compete, right, for donation dollars. And so they have to do a good job or they're not going to get any money, right? So in the private sector, you have a natural way to cut down on waste. But in government, no one gives a damn if you waste money. There's no penalty. If you're a government bureaucrat, your salary is the same whether you waste money or not. In fact, there's actually a perverse incentive to excessively spend money because a lot of times the way Washington works is an agency or a department, whatever, gets a budget. And then the following year, they base the next budget on what you spent the prior year. So if you were efficient and saved money, let's say I was allocated $10 million, but I only spent $8 million. The following year, they're going to say, oh, this program only spent $8 million. Okay, well, let's not give them $10 million. Well, we'll give them $8 million. Now you got less money. So now you got a smaller budget. You're going to have a smaller staff. You're not as important, right? Because you're in control of a smaller pot of money. Nobody wants that, right? Everybody that has a job in Washington wants to have more responsibility. They want a bigger agency department. They want a bigger budget. If for any other reason, the bigger your budget, the more you can steal for yourself, right? I mean, there's a lot of incentive there too, and we know that they're uncovering a lot of that. It's going to be great to have some investigations of some of these people who got rich running all these programs, right? But you don't want to do that. So what you want to do is max out whatever you got, right? Whatever you've been allocated, just spend it because that way next year you'll get at least that amount, if not more. In fact, people say that towards the end of every fiscal year, that's when it's great to sell stuff to the government because they're just spending whatever they haven't spent, right? If there's any money they haven't spent and they're getting close to the end of the year, they just rush to buy whatever they can, right? Because they just want to spend the money so that they can show that they spent it so they can get a bigger budget in the following year. So it's a perverse incentive to be wasteful. That's government, right? So that's why we got to keep government to an absolute minimum. But abuse, of course, everybody is going to abuse a government program without a doubt, right? And that's what the government doesn't understand. They don't understand the concept of moral hazard or the principle that you get less of what you tax and you get more of what you subsidize. So first let me think about moral hazard, right? I mean, how people will change their circumstances to qualify for a program. So let's say the government decides that it's going to come up with a certain needs-based program where if you earn less than $2,000 a month, you qualify for this benefit, whatever the benefit is. And let's say that benefit has a value of $500, whatever it is. So if you earn less than $2,000 a month, you can sign up for this government program and you'll get $500 worth of benefits, right? Well, let's say I earn $2,200 a month. Well, I don't qualify, right? Now, what if I go to my employer and I say, look, cut back my hours. I don't want to earn $2,200 a month. I want to earn $1,900 a month. So cut back my hours. I won't work as much. Now, you haven't broken the law, right? There's no fraud there. You decided to work less. But now you qualify for the $500 benefit. So now you're getting $1,900 from your employer and you're getting $500 from the government, that's $2,400. You're $200 better off, and you don't have to work as hard, right? So I didn't commit fraud. Like that's not illegal to work less and then qualify for a program, but I'm certainly abusing the program because the program was intended to help people who earned less than $2,000 a month, and I earned more. So in theory, I didn't need the help, but I changed my circumstances so I could get the help, right? People want government benefits, and they will do things. That's why when the government, let's say they figure out, okay, how many people earn less than $2,000 a month, and they want to know how many people are going to qualify for this program so they can budget it. And then it ends up that they end up spending way more than they thought because it turns out a lot more people earned less than $2,000 a month. Yes, because the minute you establish that as the cutoff, people change their circumstance. Now, some people would commit fraud, right? They would cut back their hours and then they'd get a job under the table for cash, right? So they didn't report it. Now, that would be fraud, but that happens too, right? Because the government opens up this Pandora's box of, fraud, and it's much easier. And one of the reasons it's so easy to steal from the government is they don't complain. Like if you steal from somebody in the private sector, they're going to complain because it's their money. They're going to notice it right away. They're going to do something about it. The government doesn't care less. They're so huge, they don't even notice it. But it's not your money. If you're a government bureaucrat and somebody is stealing money by getting a benefit that they're not entitled to, it doesn't cost you anything. I mean, and you're going to knock your brains out trying to figure it out. Why? You're not going to get a reward or a bonus because you found some fraud going on. So it just happens. It's so easy. It's an easy target, right, to steal from the government. It's so much easier to get away with it, and it takes a lot less effort than stealing, in the private sector. Here's another example too of that, where, not just moral hazard, but getting more of what you subsidize. So if the government taxes something, right, they get less of it, right? Whatever the government taxes, there's going to be less of it, right? If the government, put a tax, on dancing, right? If they said you want to go out dancing, and it's $100 tax, right? Not as many people are going to go dancing because they don't want to pay the $100 tax. I mean, I guess some people, if they really love dancing so much that they're going to pay $100 to go dance, they'll do it, right? But if the government, taxed you $100 for dancing, fewer people will go dancing. But on the other hand, if they decide to pay everybody $100 to go out and go dancing, a lot of people who didn't even like dancing would start going to dance clubs to get their $100, right? So if the government pays you to do something, you'll do more of it. If they tax you for doing something, you'll do less of it. Now, of course, that applies to the income tax. They're taxing you for working. So, at a point, you don't work as much because the government is discouraging you from working because they're taxing work. Well, when they pay you not to work, right, when they subsidize you and they give you money not to work, well, they get more people not working because they want to collect the money. And one of the best examples of that is what happened with the welfare program, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, which was a creature of the Lyndon Johnson Great Society, where the government said, we have all these women who are trying to raise children without a father. The father's gone, he just left them, or maybe they don't even know who the father is, whatever. But you got a woman and she's got a kid and there's no man to go out and work while she's trying to take care of the kid. Oh, this is terrible. So let's have a program for women who are trying to raise children without fathers. Let's give them money. But, the women who are married and they have a father, well, they don't need the money because they got a man in the house who can go out and work. And so they're not in trouble. We want to help these poor women who, don't have a man, yet they have a child, right? So we're going to give money to women who don't have husbands, but have children. Well, lo and behold, what happened? There was an explosion in the number of women who had children and no husbands. In fact, if a woman got pregnant and the guy hey, let me marry you, she would no, don't marry me. I can't afford it. I'm going to lose my welfare. Just stay away, right? And now women started to have more children, not just if you had one child, they gave you more money. So the more children you had, the more money you got. And so now women started having more children. And so the whole budget blew apart, right? Because when they passed this bill, there was a certain number of women who were raising children without fathers. But after the program was created, there was an explosion in the number of single women with children because they were incentivizing it. They were paying for it. You have all these generations of young women growing up and having babies themselves. When they're 13, 14, 15, they have their own babies. And now the government sets them up in a house, gives them money, right? I mean, it was like a way of life in these, intergenerational families of fatherless households, all subsidized, all paid for by the U.S. government. You know, before this started in African-American community, it was very rare for African-American families to break up and for children to be raised without a father. And, you know, and part of the problem of all these children raised without a father, especially boys, it's difficult for a woman without a husband, to discipline teenage boys, you know, to raise these boys into men without a father. They're far more likely to get involved in crime, and stuff like that when there's no father figure in the home to rein them in. It's very difficult. You know, when these kids get to be 13, 14, 15, they're a lot stronger than their mother. It's very hard for a mother to control a 14, 15, 16-year-old son. You need a man in the house to do that, but the government chased out all the men. You know, here is a crazy statistic that shows you how much damage the government can do to a family. So I looked it up, and I should have looked up the statistics on what percentage of African-American children grew up without fathers back in the 1920s, 1930s. I know it was very small, and it was about the same as for, white families. But as of today, 48% of African-American children grow up in homes without a father. 48%, almost half. Now, during slavery, right, only about a third of African-American slave children born into slavery, only about a third of them grew up without their fathers, right? Because, maybe they got sold off, or their, fathers, maybe the master sold the father or something, or sold the kid. I don't know. But it was rare, right? 2/3 of the slave children grew up in a home on a plantation with their parents, with their father. Now, I'm not condoning slavery by any stretch of the imagination. My point is the U.S. government, through the welfare state, did more damage to the family than slavery. Families were more intact when they were slaves than when they were entrapped in the welfare state. I mean, think about that. And again, I'm not saying that returning to slavery is the way to solve the problem. I'm just pointing out how much damage the government has done. That even the slave owners didn't do this much damage when it came to breaking up the family that the welfare state did. And the incentives created by the government to pay women not to have husbands, not to have fathers, and to have, multiple children all by themselves because the government paid them. So all of this is abused. All these government programs, right? They're by their very nature. So nobody should be surprised that they're finding this. And what's great about it is a lot of people don't know this. A lot of people don't realize how bad the government is. They're finding out. They're finally getting their eyes open, right, to the corruption, the criminality that is involved in government. I've always said the worst people, the most corrupt people go to government. They're attracted to government. And even if they're not corrupt when they go, they get corrupted while they're there. And that's the only reason they can stay there. Because if you're not corrupt, if you're not, you're not going to stay in Washington. You're going to leave. It's either going to disgust you and you're going to get out, or you won't be able to stay there because the more corrupt people are going to get your jobs, and they're going to beat you in the elections. Anyway, I got one more commercial, so stick around. Coming right back. You know that feeling before a first date? You're double checking your outfit, maybe getting a fresh haircut, making sure your car's clean. You want to make a great first impression, right? Well, Confidence starts with feeling your best, and that's where Mando comes in. Mando's whole body deodorant uses a doctor-created formula that's safe for your whole body, pits, feet, and everywhere in between. Mando's claims had me skeptical. 72-hour odor protection sounded too good to be true, so I had to try it, and it actually works. Mando is clinically proven to control odor better than a shower with soap alone. Want to try America's #1 whole body deodorant formula right now? For the best deals, use code GOLD at shopmando.com. Shopmando, SHOPMANDO.com. Mando Starter Pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with solid stick deodorant, clean tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice, like mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and free shipping. As a special offer for listeners, new customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Use code GOLD at shopmando.com. Shopmando, SHOPMANDO.com. Please support our show and tell them that we sent you. Smell fresher, stay drier, and boost your confidence from head to toe with Mando. Go to shopmando.com and use the promo code GOLD. Okay. Anyway, so I was just trying to look on ChatGPT for some of these statistics for children growing up in fatherless households before the Great Society programs. And I'm not, according to ChatGPT, for white families, it was 10 to 15%, and black families was 20 to 25%. I don't know if those are accurate numbers, but clearly the numbers have moved up dramatically over time, particularly for African American, and that even the 10 to 20% or 20% number would be an improvement over what was experienced during slavery. But now it is way worse, just with that statistic. I mean, obviously, there are many other aspects of lives where they're better off, but with that one particular, it's worse. And of course, that has created a lot of other socioeconomic problems that have been the result of children growing up without fathers, the extra crime, and all sorts of things that have followed from that. Of course, they haven't even ended that program. I think they've tweaked it a bit. It's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still ongoing today, and it still continues to do a lot of damage. Anyway, earlier today we got the Fed minutes, the FOMC minutes that came out, and one of the interesting things about the minutes is that they repeatedly spoke about the need to kind of be patient and, hold off on any additional rate cuts. They said that they wanted to maintain their restrictive stance longer and not cut until they have more signs, more evidence that inflation is going back down to 2%. Now, first of all, right now, there's no sign that it's going down to 2% because it's going in the other direction. So they shouldn't even be saying we're looking for more signs. They should be saying we're looking for our first sign, or they should be saying we're looking for signs that the current trend towards higher inflation is transitory, right? They're not really saying how bad it is, but they're saying that they're looking for a sign that inflation is coming down. Well, they're not going to find one. But the interesting part is that they continue to emphasize that their current policy stance is restrictive. It's not restrictive. That is the problem. See, they think that they have restrictive monetary policy, and so they just assume that this restriction is going to lead to lower inflation in the future. So they're just sitting back and waiting for it to happen. But the reality is the policy that is in place right now is stimulative. It's not restrictive. It is fueling the inflation fire. It is not putting it out. And so while they're waiting for inflation to go down, it's going to go up. What they're not talking about in the minutes is raising interest rates, is the possibility that they made a mistake, or the possibility that their current policy rate is not restrictive, because they can't even consider that that's a possibility. But debt continues to increase at all levels in the economy. That is a sign that credit is too loose. Remember, Inflation is an expansion of the supply of money and of the supply of credit. So if credit is expanding, you are putting upward pressure on prices. And if your interest rates are still so low that credit is expanding, you are pursuing an inflationary policy. You need to raise rates high enough to contract credit so that people don't borrow money because it's too expensive to borrow money. But people keep borrowing it because it's cheap. And if you look at a real rate of inflation, in fact, not even the real rate, look at the current nominal rate of inflation, right? The last month had inflation up 0.5% in 1 month, or prices. That's 6% inflation if you annualize that. If you annualize the last 3 months of inflation, it's 5%. The Fed funds rate is 4.25%. So if your Fed funds rate is lower than your inflation rate, well, by definition, that's stimulative, right? Because interest rates are negative, right? You're getting paid to borrow money. Remember, I said earlier, the government gets more of what they subsidize. If they're going to pay me to borrow money, if they're going to say, hey, borrow money at 4% and pay it back when inflation is 5%, I'm getting free money. There's no real cost to borrowing. So more people are going to borrow if the government's going to pay you to borrow. What they need to do is ratchet up interest rates to make borrowing expensive. So fewer people will do it, but they don't have the guts to actually choke off all that debt-fueled consumption because they know that it will produce a recession, and they don't want that. So they don't really want to fight inflation. So they just pretend that their accommodative policy is restrictive. And meanwhile, inflation, as obvious, is going to keep getting worse. The question is, when are they going to do something about it? Or when is the market going to realize that they can't do something about it? Because so far, the market seems to accept, at least superficially, that they got it under control. Now, another thing they mentioned in there was that they're getting close to tapering their quantitative tightening, which is something that, I've been saying for a while. They're going to stop the quantitative tightening. But I think stopping the tightening is just the first step to launching the next round of QE. And again, they've said that they can't do that unless they're at the zero bound. I think that's just their own policy that they can change whenever they want, just like they adopted the 2% inflation target. By the way, New Zealand, the Reserve Bank in New Zealand just cut rates 50 basis points last night. I think they're at like 3.5 or something. I forget exactly, but they've cut now, I think, by 150 basis points. They've had 350 basis points cut. So they were up above 5. But it was New Zealand that initially came up with the 2% ceiling. But they couldn't quite meet it, right? Because they wanted to have bigger deficits because they're running budget deficits now in New Zealand. Right? They had gotten rid of them for a while. But they actually raised their ceiling to a 2 to 3% range. So now the Reserve Bank of New Zealand that started out with a 2% ceiling now has a 2% floor, right? They now have a target range of inflation from 2 to 3. So 2 used to be the ceiling. Now it's the floor of this new range, right? This just got changed over time. But the government actually changed it. They actually had to change the Reserve Act because the act actually stated that there was a 2% ceiling. But there was some political pressure to change that to enable bigger deficits, to enable higher inflation, as if higher inflation is a good thing. It's not. They would have been better off had they left the ceiling intact. But, that gets in the way of free stuff from the government. And so the public doesn't really understand what free stuff from the government costs. And so if it means they have to have higher inflation to get that free stuff, well, that's something that they're willing to accept. But it's interesting that they're now at 2 to 3%, and we're saying we're at 2%, but we're really got that from New Zealand. And so when is the U.S. government going to admit that, well, 2% is not the target, it's 3? That's coming. That is going to happen. But of course, they're not going to be able to meet 3 either, because the inflation rate is going to be much higher than that. And Donald Trump, and I was watching his speech just before I started doing this podcast. Donald Trump was doing a speech down in Miami. And of course, since he's in Florida, he had to, throw some fresh meat to the Bitcoin crowd by talking about Bitcoin. I noticed he got the price to go up a little bit, talking about how much Bitcoin went up after he was elected, takes credit for that. This is great. We're going to make the U.S. the crypto capital. I really hope we're not the crypto capital, because whoever's the crypto capital loses, right? Because whoever has the most crypto when the music stops is the big loser. And of course, whatever country squanders more of its resources on the Bitcoin bubble and crypto and blah and all that, is the biggest loser, because that money could have been invested productively. Instead, it's squandered. But he said, while I was president, he repeated that stuff, about how we had the greatest economy in the history of America when I was president. He said people were amazed. They couldn't believe how great it was. It's like, I don't know if he actually believes that stuff. But he said again in that if he had been reelected, we would have had no inflation problem. That inflation was low. It was 1% when he left. And if he had stayed here, it would have stayed down there. Forgetting about the fact that inflation really started to rise in the final months of his presidency. And the worst year of inflation under Biden was the very first year that he was in office. And of course, a lot of that inflation was Trump. Now, Trump is already basically saying, because, the Democrats are trying to, hold him responsible for the bad inflation numbers we just got for January. And Trump is like, hey, I've only been here for 3 weeks. This is Biden's inflation. Right. And he's going to be blaming these bad inflation numbers. Right. He's going to be calling it Biden inflation for most of the year. I guarantee you that come June, July, we're still getting bad inflation numbers. He's going to say, hey, look, I've only been here 6 months. Right. We're still dealing with Biden inflation. Well, for the first 6 months, when Biden was president, he was still dealing with Trump inflation, right? The worst year that Biden had was his very first year, right? And so for Trump to say, had I been reelected, we would have had no inflation, it's a complete, lie, right? Of course, we would have had inflation, and we're going to have a lot more inflation, even though we're getting these cuts from DOGE. It's not going to be enough, given the enormity of the problem that we have. And the size of the cuts relative to the rest of the budget, right? Even if they're substantial, they're not going to be enough to undo even the tax cuts that they're proposing, right? Because they're the only cuts that they're probably going to make are these DOGE cuts, right? Congress isn't going to vote for cuts. So whatever the DOGE department can ram through, will get. But I don't think Congress is going to really vote to cut anything else. They never do, and they're the Democrats are certainly not going to support it, and the Republicans may need some Democratic votes to get this stuff through, because there's going to be some conservative Republicans that aren't going to want to vote for these huge deficits. So the only way to get these bills over the finish line is going to be to attract some Democrats, and they're going to want something for that support, because they don't give a damn about the size of the deficits. They'll just make them bigger. So the only cuts we're probably going to get are whatever cuts we can get out of the executive branch, and it's not going to be enough. By the way, one of the interesting things that they are talking about right now is doing an audit of the gold in Fort Knox. And I mean, that could open up a hell of a can of worms. First of all, the last time that the gold was audited was 1953. 1953. Not many Americans alive today were alive the last time there was an audit of the U.S. gold holdings. So how do we know that the U.S. government still has all the gold that they claim to have? Well, we don't know. I mean, maybe they don't have it. Maybe it's been leased out. Maybe it's been sold. Who the hell knows, right? Maybe some of it's been stolen. Nobody knows. Now, of course, it doesn't really matter in a sense that it used to matter, because back in the 1950s, when they were auditing the holdings, people who held Federal Reserve notes wanted to know that the gold was there, because that's what those notes were. I went over this on the podcast. Federal Reserve notes were promises to pay gold. They were promises to pay dollars, which were defined by a weight of gold. So if you had $35 and you were, let's say for the French government, and you had $35 in reserves, you were entitled to an ounce of gold. Well, you weren't going to take the U.S. government's word for it. You wanted to see some independent audits. And so there were audits of the government's gold holdings. So, okay, yeah, they've got enough gold to back up their notes. It'd be like if somebody writes you a check and you want to know what their balance is. Hey, you just wrote me a $10,000 check. Can I see your bank balance? Do you actually have enough money, or is this check going to bounce, right? That's what our creditors wanted to know. I got your Federal Reserve note. Do you have the gold, right, that you're obligated to pay? Well, during the 1960s, when we really started to run up these big deficits for the Great Society programs, War on Poverty, the Vietnam War, the space race, all that crap that we were spending money on that we didn't have taxes, and we started running these deficits, we weren't really doing any audits because we knew, right, that we didn't have enough gold. We didn't have enough gold to make good on our notes because we had to have enough gold to give everybody with $35 an ounce. And clearly we didn't have enough. And, as the 1960s progressed, right, a lot of our foreign creditors, figured it out for themselves, right? They see all these deficits, they see all the money we're spending, and they're like, there's no way they got the gold. This is bullshit. And, and so I'm just going to cash in now while I can, right? I don't want to be the last man stuck. I want to cash in my Federal Reserve notes now and get dollars, right? I don't want to wait and be SOL, right? When, I want to hurry up and get my gold while I can. And so that's when you started to see like Charles de Gaulle and others, where it was like a run on the bank. Everybody was taking their Federal Reserve notes and saying, give me my gold. And that's when Nixon, he tried to slow it down. He devalued the dollar twice. Okay, we don't have enough. We can't do it at 35. How about 37? And our creditor said, bullshit. I want my gold even at 37. I don't blink. You got it. And then we went, we devalued a couple of times. We got to 42. And then we said, screw it. We'll let's shut the gold window, right? That was the only way to stop it. Well, once we left the gold standard in 1971, it really didn't matter how much gold we had because nobody was entitled to any of it. I mean, nobody who owns Federal Reserve notes now believes that they're entitled to any gold, right? It doesn't matter how much gold we have. It's irrelevant because you can't get any gold for your Federal Reserve notes. Now, the relevance might be that's our reserve to support the dollar, right? Because other countries have their reserves in dollars, or they have it in euros or yen or pounds or other currencies. The United States hardly has any foreign exchange reserves, hardly any. But what we do have, in theory, is a big hoard of gold. And so what that gold would enable us to do, if the dollar really started to fall, right, and we wanted to defend it, we could take gold and sell it and buy back dollars, right? We can, use our gold to buy back our notes, right? But if we don't actually have that gold, right, if it turns out that gold isn't there, all hell's going to break loose. Right? There are some people who think, well, that'll be bad for gold if we don't have it. No. It'll be phenomenal for gold if we don't have it. If the United States doesn't have that gold that we claim to have, gold prices are going to go ballistic and the dollar is going to tank because that means we are defenseless. We have no reserves of anything in order to defend the dollar. And it means the U.S. government needs to buy gold. Well, where's the price going to go if the government doesn't have the gold that everybody thought it had, right? So that is a big deal. And because if we don't have our gold, that doesn't just mean there's more gold in the world. It just means that the gold that China has, the gold that India has, the gold that Russia has, the gold that Saudi Arabia has, is the gold that we used to have, right? That's probably where a lot of these countries got their gold if we sold ours. Right? It's not like there's just big supplies somewhere floating around, right? It's accounted for. We've just been overcounting it, which means there's not as much gold in the world as we thought, right? Because the U.S. government's gold's not there. Now, maybe China has more than they're letting us know. That's the other speculation. We have less and China has more. So we'll find that out in theory if we have an audit. Although, you might be afraid if they actually send some auditors down to Fort Knox and they get into the vaults and, there's just cobwebs down there. Are they actually going to come out and tell us that? I mean, because again, it's going to be a financial disaster. Now, of course, immediately when Elon Musk posts something about that, and Michael Saylor comes out and Bitcoin fixes this, right? The idea is, well, if they had a Bitcoin reserve, we wouldn't have this problem because everybody would know exactly how much Bitcoin they have. If the U.S. dollar was still backed by gold, the way it should be redeemable, we would have an audit, right? Because people would care. The reason that we're not auditing it is because it's not backed by gold right now, right? So there's been no reason to have the audit. But Bitcoin doesn't fix that. Yeah, sure. Everybody knows how much Bitcoin you have, but who cares? The Bitcoin is worthless. What difference does it make? Yeah, I can audit it. So what? You're auditing nothing. At least when you audit gold, you're auditing something. And yeah, you have to have trusted third parties that can come in there and verify that the gold is there. But, you have private companies, you could have multiple unrelated third parties that could do audits, independent audits, and, it would work. It did work. The reason that we stopped auditing is because we defaulted, and then at that point, there was no point. But if there's no gold's going a lot higher. It's another reason to buy it right now, right? Don't wait. Matter of fact, gold is at a record high. It hit a record high today. I don't know if it's at a new record high right now. No, it's 29.36, but it got over 29.40 this evening and last night, and intraday it traded over. I think it almost got to 29.45. I think maybe 29.43-ish was the new record high, but gold puts in a new record high almost every day now. I mean, it has a pullback once in a while. Silver almost got back above $33 again today. Got to about 32.90 something. And then it's pulled back. Right now it's around, 32.60, 32.70. Again, silver is the steal, right? Gold's a buy, silver is a steal, right? At this price. I mean, I remember when gold got to 2,000, silver peaked out. It didn't even get to 2,000, and silver got up to $50 in 2011. Gold got to 1,900. Gold is 50% higher than it was then, and silver is 40% lower. So silver is a steal. But again, gold stocks, Ashanti Gold, Anglo Ashanti came out. Very good earnings, really good earnings today. But they did warn that next year production would be less than they thought. And the stock opened down like 8.5%. It didn't close down 8.5%. It closed down like 3.5%, but they were great earnings. Earnings grew. I mean, I think free cash flow was up 900%. Earnings were up like 80, 90% from last year. They increased their dividend like 250%. I mean, great numbers. The stock's at 11 times earnings, but the stock went down because they said, we're going to have lower production. I'm not sure why the production is going to be down, but Wall Street always overreacts to lower production because usually there's a reason that production is being delayed, but it's not being ended, right? Whatever gold they don't produce is still in the ground. That gold is still there. So if Anglo Ashanti doesn't pull that gold out of the ground in 2025, maybe they pull it out in 2026. And you know what? They'll probably make even more money on that gold selling it in 2026 than they do selling it in 2025. So the annual production is not that important unless they tell you, we're restating our reserves, right? We thought we had this much gold, and it turns out we don't. We have a lot less gold than we thought. That is a big deal. But if they don't reduce their reserves, if they just say, look, this mine is having a difficulty, we have to spend some money on some repairs, there's going to be a delay, and so we're not going to get the gold out of the ground as fast as we thought, who cares? I mean, maybe it's the present value of money, but that's going to be offset, I think, by the future increase in the price of gold. But again, most of these analysts just think the price of gold is going to go down in the future. They're like, oh, crap, they're not going to get it out of the ground right now in time to sell it at 2,900. They're not going to get it out for a couple of years, and the price is going to be way down by then, right? That's the outlook that everybody has. So you still have these companies reporting good earnings and the stock going down when the stocks were already cheap before they got the good earnings, and they should have got up. Now, look, I don't know exactly when this is going to change. Again, I'm just telling people, take advantage of this opportunity. Well, you can load up on the Euro-Pacific Capital Gold Fund EPIGX. No, Euro-Pacific. Wait, Euro-Pacific IGX. Euro-Pacific GIX. Euro-Pacific Gold Fund, EPGIX. That's the symbol. How do I keep forgetting? EPGIX is the no-load symbol for the Gold Fund. Or talk to the reps at Europac.com about loading up on these gold stocks. I mean, one of these days, I'm going to be doing this show, and I'm going to be talking about this explosive move up in the gold stocks. And I hope as many people in my audience have already bought them by the time I deliver that news, that it's not, oh, crap, I should have bought. I woulda, coulda, shoulda. Just buy now, and so that when I report how much these stocks have gone up, that you'll own them before then. Again, so go to Europac.com and buy them. You can buy them right on the fund on the website if you don't have a brokerage account. Anyway, that's it for tonight. Don't forget, like the podcast, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Still trying to get up to that 600,000 subscribers to my YouTube channel. Make sure and get our newsletters at schiffsovereign.com. I think I'm going to do another podcast again on Sunday night. So make sure and be there live for a Sunday night Peter Schiff Show podcast. Bye for now.